What's up everybody, welcome to Academy of Aperture, and today we're going to be learning the absolute basics of photography. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is really exciting. This is our first course on the Academy of Aperture website. We've done a lot of different courses and tutorials and things on YouTube, but this is the first full course that we'll be doing and putting all the content together for. We originally shot all of this content back in April of 2020 when the pandemic hit with the coronavirus. And at the time we were still doing modifications with the studio and setting up shooting areas and things like that, because obviously the studio was shut, so we had full reign to move things about. We recorded the video and we were going to create the website then, but unfortunately we weren't happy with that video quality, and the other videos that we shot for the website, we weren't overly happy with them either. So now it's time to re-record them, and this is what we're doing. So this course is about learning the absolute basics of photography. So what we're going to go through is the digital cameras, what are digital cameras, lenses, flashes, and also a lot of photography terms which I use commonly for different things. So aperture, shutter speed, ISO. We're going to go over all of those in different sections, explain what they are, how you use them, and other things like that. If you're a beginner and you've just got a camera and you're going to pick up loads of information, loads of advice throughout the thing, so make sure you have a pen and paper handy, so if you want to write things down. But with the training course itself and these videos, you can just go back and redo them over and over again, so you can watch something a number of times. If you're unsure about the terminology or you want to experiment with it further, then you can just watch it over and you're sorted with that. If you're already into photography and you want to sort of just have a brush up on it, or if you want to try and learn some new things, then you can follow the course as well, and it'd be great to have you on board. Hopefully now you watch the welcome video, you'll be able to see what things are coming up in the next couple of videos. So we're going to be talking about the cameras, the lenses, and also the basic terminology. If you're interested in those, then those videos are going to be coming up next. What's up everybody? Today we're going to be talking about what a camera is. So in this video, for the absolute basics of photography, we're going to be looking at a camera and what an actual camera is. So a camera in basic terminology is an optical instrument used to capture an image. These are usually sealed bodies or boxes with a hole for an aperture or a lens to go in to let the aperture with the light through, which then gets captured onto a digital sensor on the back of it with a digital camera. Generally, with your DSLR cameras, you have a body with a removable lens. However, you can get digital cameras with a fixed lens that's already in there, so you can't take that off and on. Most digital cameras too, you'll have a screen on the back so you can view all the different settings. If you don't have that, you actually have the viewfinder as well. And some of them have electronic viewfinders like this one, so you can see the details on both of them. And generally on the cameras, you're going to have the dials on the top, so you can change the different shooting settings. So you can go your manual, your automatic, your sports mode, that sort of thing. On some digital cameras, you also have options to change on the dials the shutter settings and the ISO, whereas some of them have an actual digital version of that, so you can change that on there. Generally, on your digital cameras, you have a shutter button. So whenever you press that shutter button, that opens up the sensor and that captures all of the light and that captures the image. So depending on what shutter speed you have it on, that's how much time the sensor is open and gathering all of that data. But in a later video, we'll go over shutter speed and all of those other different settings, so you don't need to know about that now. So basically on your DSLR cameras and your mirrorless cameras, you have the option to change the different lenses. So basically your lens goes on here and then that's what you shoot with. So that's the absolute basics of what a camera is. And like I said, you get the cameras with the fixed lenses, so you can't actually switch the lenses out. You get the ones like these, so you take the cover off, you can change the different lenses, so you can have a zoom lens, a wide angle lens, whatever you want for whatever you're shooting. All camera bodies are different as well. They all have different size sensors, so the bigger the sensor, the more light it's going to let in, so you don't have to use a higher ISO, and which we'll talk about further on is when you use a higher ISO, it lets in more noise. So to alleviate that, you get something like a full frame sensor, which is better than a crop sensor and a micro four thirds sensor. So with a full frame camera like a Canon 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV, you get a larger sensor, so it lets in more light. However, with your crop sensors, so again with the Canon like your 500D, 700D, those sort of lines along like that, you have a much smaller sensor, so it doesn't let in more light compared to a full frame camera. And obviously you have these mirrorless cameras where there's no mirror that goes up and down like in the other cameras. I always get the question of saying, you're a photographer, so what camera should I buy? At the end of the day, it depends on what budget you have, what you're shooting, and what you're going to need the camera for. For example, if you're shooting landscapes, you're not going to need a massive sensor to let in loads of light, because the majority of stuff you're going to be shooting is during the day, so there's going to be loads of sunlight. However, if you're a gig photographer and you're doing live music in a very dark environment and only lit by a couple of lights, you're going to need something that lets in a lot of light so you don't use as much grain. But then the camera body, that's coupled with the lens, which also leads us on to the next video, which is going to talk about lenses. And again, going with the thing, people saying, what what camera should I buy? For me, and my personal experience, the best thing to spend the money on is the lenses. So you can have an older camera body which doesn't perform well in low light and different things like that. Put on a lens which is 1.4, 1.8 aperture, then you're going to get some cracking images because that quality of the glass is really superior and obviously better than the kit lens that comes with it. So that's the way I say it. And obviously when you stop down that aperture, it lets in more light anyway, so you're not going to have to bump up your ISO on that old camera to let in more noise. So that's the best way. Like I said, when people ask what camera to buy, it all depends on what you're going to shoot, what's your budget, and 9 times out of 10 I would say, well, what you're going to shoot, and the best thing to do is look at the lenses first. So that's it for camera bodies. It's time now to talk about some lenses. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about lenses. So what is a camera lens? A camera lens is something which attaches to your camera and comes in a massive range of different styles and focal lengths to allow you to capture different images. The two main different styles of lenses are the zoom lens and a prime lens. A zoom lens basically means that you have a lens which you can zoom in and out and cover a range of different focal distances. So for example, this is a 50 to 140. So as you can see here, that's at 50 mil. I can zoom that in to 140 mil, and that means that it's going to zoom in close to the subject, and that's going to zoom further away. 9 times out of 10 with the DSLR camera with an interchangeable lens, you get something called a kit lens, and that's usually like an 18 to 55 mil lens. So that covers a wide angle and also zoomed in. However, with things like the kit lenses, they have the variable aperture. What does the variable aperture mean? As you can see here on the front of the lens, it's got the focal length, so the 50 to 140, and say it's an f2.8. With the kit lenses and things like that, it would have something like a f3.5 to 5.6. So when it's on the widest setting like your 18mm, that's going to be an aperture of f3.5. So that's the most that you can stop that lens down to. However, when you zoom in and you go to your 55mm, you zoomed in more to the subject. However, you're now stuck with a f5.6 to capture images with. So obviously in low light, when you're using that, you're going to be at f5.6, so you're going to have to raise your ISO further up to let in more light. And again, with that introduces more grain. So ideally, if you're shooting with a kit lens in low light, then you need to be on the 18mm so you can step that aperture right down to the f3.5. Not all zoom lenses are like that, however. You have fixed aperture lenses like this one here. So this is the f2.8. So no matter if I'm shooting at 50mm or 140mm, I can always step down to f2.8. I can change the setting here so I can go all the way up to f22 if I need to. However, if I still need to stay at f2.8, then I can. So again, at a live music event, I can have my ISO right the way down to keep away noise, and I can have it on f2.8 and I can zoom in and out, and that's not going to change at all for my aperture. And the second kind of lens is a prime lens. So compared to a zoom lens, a prime lens has that fixed focal length. So for example, one of the most popular prime lenses for beginner photographers to get is the 50mm f1.8, and that means it has a fixed focal length of 50mm, and you can get it down to f1.8. So instead of zooming into your subject, what you have to do is actually use your feet and walk towards the subject or walk further away, and that's how you use the zoom on a prime lens. Prime lenses come in a wide different variety of different focal lengths and apertures. So for example, the lens that we're using now on this camera to record, this is a 16mm f1.4, and that is a fixed focal length of 16mm, which is quite a wide angle. If you were taking images and you wanted to get in close to your subject, you'd either have to get the subject to bring closer to you, or you would have to step further back from the subject, and that's how you do the zoom with the prime lens. And they come in a wide different variety of focal lengths, so you can have a really wide angle lens, like we've got a 7.5mm, which is pretty much a fisheye lens, really wide, really good for live music and different things like that. Something a bit different as well to get different environment and portraits, and you can go all the way up the other spectrum. So you've got your 100mm macro, so that's a 100mm focal length, and a lot of people use that for portraiture as well, and for wildlife and other things like that you can get 400mm focal lengths, and those are all fixed on that focal length. That is your two different categories of lenses, so your prime and your zoom lenses. And the age-old question comes back again about what camera to buy is the same as what lens to buy. It all depends on what you're shooting and how you want to shoot it. So for example, you want to shoot weddings, they need something like a 24-70 or 24-105. That gives a massive focal range, so no matter where you are, you can zoom in and out, and generally they come with like an f2.8 aperture or an f4, so you can get away with it. Or there's something like the 70-200, which is my 50-140 on the crop sensor. That's really good. That goes down to f2.8. It gives you a massive zoom range. However, on the wide angle, you can't really get into it. And again, with the portraitures, like I said, the most popular lens for beginners is probably the 50mm f1.8 lens, which is sometimes known as the Nifty 50. There's a lot of people use that for portraiture, and because it's an f1.8, you can shoot that in low light, and you can also get a very narrow depth of field, so you can focus on the eyes and get everything else out of focus, which is really good for portraits. The other thing which a lot of people use is the 85mm. So you can get a range of different 85mm, so you can get something like an 85 f1.2 for Canon. I think that's a couple of grand, or you can get the 85, I think there's an f1.8 for Canon, which is a couple of £100. So again, depends on your budget as to what lens you can go for as well. And that's the end of the lenses video. And the next video, we're going to be talking about flash. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about flashes. And before you ask, no, it's not about the people with Ray Max who flash people, it's actual flashes that go with cameras. So what is a camera flash? A camera flash can be used on camera or off camera. Generally, a flash is used to illuminate a subject or a certain bit of a scene which you want to incorporate in your photograph. They all come in a different variety of sizes and styles and price range. Normally on your camera you'll have a pop-up flash, and generally you can sort of use that for snapshots and things like that. However, if you're taking pictures of people, what it's going to do is illuminate the subject, but you're going to have a shadow all the way around because that flash is just pointing straight at the subject, and it's not very flattering at all. The most common thing which people get are these speed lights. So the majority of my flash equipment is from Godox, and I've gone through the whole thing of having Canon and other brand specific accessories and flashes to use. However, the Godox offers the most versatility in terms of using it with other different camera systems, things like that. You're not actually fixed into using it on the one camera system. So speed light is something which you can attach to the camera or you can use off camera. Basically all you do is you attach it to the camera, and there's a number of different settings you can use. There's a TTL, which is through the lens, and TTL goes off your camera settings. So what it does, it looks through the lens and see what settings you use, and it automatically uses the flash power to illuminate the subject or correctly expose the photograph for you. There's also a setting for manual mode. So what you can do is you can actually set the power of the flash on the flash itself, so you don't have to rely on the camera processing the settings to go through to the flash and doing the TTL option. And then the bonus of having the manual option is if you use it off camera flash, is you can set the power of this to get the image that you want. The bonus thing about most of these Godox things as well is it comes with high speed sync. Generally, the shutter of your camera, when you take an image, the shutter goes up and down and captures the image. The cutoff speed for majority of camera bodies is 1/200th of a second. When you go over that, it doesn't let in enough light, so what you end up with is a black bar along the bottom of your images. This is where high speed sync comes in. You turn that on and you can go up to whatever shutter speed you need to, and it's still letting enough light, you don't get that black bar along the bottom of the image. So if you're shooting some portraits with off-camera flash outside, you want to expose the sky and the environment for the image that you need to do. However, you won't need to use something like f2.8, so you can have the subject in focus, the background out of focus, but you still want the colors and the brightness of that. This is where the high-speed sync comes in, because you put your ISO down to 100, say f2.8, and you're going to be massively overexposed for the background. If you drop your shutter speed down to, say, I don't know, 1/500th of a second, that gets your background correctly exposed for whatever lighting it is. Then all you do is pop in your flash, put your high-speed sync on, set your settings for the correct power on the flash, and you're good to go. So a lot of people use the speed lights on cameras for events and things like that. And if you're getting adventurous and you're using off-camera flash and you want to upgrade to something a bit more powerful and a bit different, the next thing up is something like this. So this is a flash which you can use off camera, and this particular one is the AD200 from Godox. Essentially it's the same as a speed light, so you can use it off camera. Basically you get a mount to put it in, or there's options here so you can thread it onto a light stand. And again, when you turn it on, you've got your manual settings, so you have different channels, so you can select your channels for whatever flash you're shooting on, and you can change the power and things on there. So you can put the power down, you can put the power up, and obviously there's your full power. And also the thing about these is they actually come with TTL as well. So if you're unsure about flash ratios and power and things like that, just set this to TTL and you're good to go. This also has high speed sync. So you hold in the button, turn that on, and that operates that. These are super easy to use, super portable, so you can chuck them in your bag, put them up, put them anywhere you want, and they're really easy to use. And like I said, and as it's got a lithium-ion battery, the battery lasts for quite a while, and also you don't have the issues with AA's and other batteries and things like that. When you're taking flashes, you can pop them off, especially at lower power, and you're not going to have that much of a recycle time. So as you can see there, that's just popped off loads, and you can do that when shooting, so you're never going to miss a shot. All your lighting's going to be the same, and that's perfect. And then the other thing with lighting, you got these like your studio strobes. So we have a lot of these in the studio, and these are handy because they are powered in. So if you're shooting inside, then power isn't an issue. If you're shooting outside, then obviously you're going to need a generator or something like that. So that's where the speed light and the other flash comes in handy. But again, this is essentially the same. With this, all you have to do is adjust the power, and it's got the wireless option. So when you use the trigger, you just take a picture and this fires off as well. You can see on the front here, this has got a Bones mount. So all of the Bones adapters like the Beauty Dish and the Octabox and things like that, I can use those on this flash. Then for the other flashes, I have an adapter which the flash goes into. So with these AD200s, I have something similar. So as you can see here, this is the mount that goes in. So it just slots in here like this. You screw that on. Then when you're using the flash, it actually gives you versatility. So when it's on a light stand, you can actually move it up and down and change the position of it. So you can actually modify the light that way. The good thing about using this mount compared to just mounting it to a light stand is when you put it on, you can actually move this arm to tilt up and down. Like I said, it's got the bones mount, so I can attach my lighting modifiers on here. So I can have studio modifiers like a beauty dish or an octabox and use that on location rather than just using bare bulb. So that's a little look at flashes, and in the future there'll be a much larger training course and other videos regarding flash, so using high-speed sync, changing settings and other things like that. So I hope you learned a little bit about flash, and until the next video. What's up everybody? Today we're going to be talking about what other photography you may need when doing photographs. The list of accessories is endless, and it all depends on what you're shooting and how you shoot as to what sort of things they can get. So starting with some of the basics, what you can do is you can get a battery grip. So that goes on your camera and that adds in extra batteries so your camera will last longer when taking photographs or recording video. The other bonus of that is it has a grip, so when you're holding your camera horizontal you can take a picture, but when you hold it vertical the same grip is there, so you don't have to hold your hand around like that. You can use the battery grip and take images. The other thing on the front of your lenses is you can get different filters. So on the front of your lens it'll tell you what size millimeter diameter is, so you can get screw-on filters. There's a whole range of different filters. A lot of people use UV filters to protect their lens, so you put that on the front. That's just a clear glass and that'll protect your lens if it gets banged. The filter that I have on most of my lenses is a variable ND filter, so when I'm doing video I can shoot at the appropriate settings that I want, and if it's still too bright I can adjust this ND filter and that brings it down. So for example here I can just twist it, and as you can see there, that changes the settings on the video. And just like that I can make the image brighter or I can make the image darker. So depending on what I need, that's easily done. There's also just your standard ND filters which come in different densities, so you can have a really dark one or a really light one. A lot of landscape photographers use these. So for example, if you want to take an image of a river or a stream and you want the water to look like it's glass, so you capture all that movement, what you have to do is use a long shutter speed. However, if you're doing that in the daytime, it's just going to blow it out completely. So if you put the ND filter on, you can make the image darker and you can use that long exposure so you can grab that image perfectly. At the other end of the spectrum, you can get other things that are very creative. So you can get macro filters, so you can have your 1, 2, 4, 8 close-up, and that is when you put the filter on, it's like a magnifying glass, so it zooms in the image without the need for a macro lens. There's things like star filters as well, so you can get a 4-star, a 6-star, an 8-star. And basically that means is when you take a picture and it's got a light in the background, when the light hits the lens it'll actually give off star trails off that light. So if you want to create something really unique and different, then you can use that. There's a whole bunch of different filters, so what you can do is you can go on eBay. If you get your filter size, you can put in like 62mm filter, put that in, it'll bring up loads of different options and loads of different things, so you can get that, get creative, or like I said, a lot of people use UV filters just to protect the glass on the lens. It's up to you. Next thing on the list, tripods. So this camera's currently on a tripod now. Obviously doing video work like this comes in really handy for me, so I can set up the camera, I can leave it and I can shoot myself doing these videos. A lot of people with landscapes use it, so if you're using a long exposure, it keeps the camera steady. If you're doing macro work or product work, it's really handy to have the camera set up on a tripod so you can set it away. And if you need to make slight adjustments, you can just move it slightly rather than having to take a picture, look at it, think, oh that's different, I need to remember where you were and redo it and do it that way. Sometimes when I'm shooting as well in the studio, doing portraits and commercial work and things like that, sometimes I can use a tripod. So if we're doing clothing and we have the lighting set up, put the camera on a tripod, shoot that, and then no matter what, the camera's in the same place at the same time with the same lights, so all you have to do, take the pictures, and it's really easy to edit and everything looks exactly the same. So for example, if you're using e-commerce for clothing, then all of the images are going to be the same. It's going to be the same angle, same height, same everything, so everything is going to be concurrent. Next up, camera bag. So if you're getting a lot of this equipment, then you're going to need a bag to put it in. I've gone through a whole range of things, so you had your shoulder bags, you had your backpacks, and now I've gone onto a roller bag. So as you can see here, this is my roller bag, and inside of there I've got all the cameras, lenses, lights and things like that that I need for my daily use. And obviously in the pockets you have options for filters, lenses, cards, whatever you need. The main reason that I switch from that is when you're having a backpack, sometimes it'll hurt your back if you're using it for a long time. However, the roller bag, you can use it as a backpack and you can also use it as a roll along. So all I have to do is when I'm going anywhere to the car or anything like that, pull up the handle and I can just pull the bag, and it's much easier to carry it all. Especially when you've got a lot of equipment and the equipment starts to get heavy, so much easier. To go along with your flashes is you need some triggers. Like I said, the majority of my stuff is from Godox, however this trigger is from Pixel Pro, but you can get the Godox option as well. What that does is it sits on on your hot shoe on your camera, that syncs up with the flash, so you can actually change the flash settings by using the trigger on top of the camera. So if you're on location, you have lights set up quite far away, instead of going backwards and forwards to the flash to turn the power up and turn the power down, you can just use the trigger, take a shot. If it's not bright enough, then you can just adjust it, turn the brightness up and take the next one. It's super useful and definitely something that you need to do if you're going to use off-camera flash. In the past I've used different triggers, so I've used the ones that connect up your camera and the flash and use infrared. It's okay if you work in the studio, however if you're on location, if the sun's bright, then the infrared doesn't work, so it doesn't fire it. And again with that, you can't change the power of the flash, so if you need to change the flash, you would have to go to the flash, change the power, come back and shoot. Something which you may or may not need is lighting modifiers. Like I said, with the flashes you have the holder which the flash goes into, and there's an actual mount on the front for a Bowens mount or whatever other mount you want to use. And what you can do is add these attachments. So you can see here you've got the strip boxes, we've got an octabox lighting me up, got beauty dishes, got loads of different things that you can use. You don't actually need them, you can use the flash bare bulb. However, if you want to create different styles of images and sculpt the light to whatever you need, then this is where the modifiers come into play. Not related to photography, more video. However, you can get microphones as well. So you can get a shotgun mic which goes on the top, which is commonly like a Rode, or I've been using Comica a lot lately for audio. Or you can get something like a microphone with a lavalier or a wireless microphone, so you can have that plugged in the camera and the person speaking can use that microphone as well. Like on this video, we're using a Comica Boom XD. So I've got a transmitter right here and also the receivers on the camera, so whenever I'm talking, it's recording the audio to the camera. Other additional things to get is additional cards and additional batteries. If you're taking photos and it's very cold, then obviously your batteries are going to run down much quicker. So if you've only got one battery that comes with the camera, if you're out taking pictures and you're getting some really good shots and it's really cold and the battery runs down straight away, then you're a bit knackered. So it's always good to have loads of spare batteries, and also the same with cards. So with some digital cameras you get an option to shoot with to 2 cards or just 1 card. If you're shooting to just 1 card, that'll just take your images, and if you're shooting RAW, then that'll write all of those images. Once that card's full, then that's it. You'd have to get another card in and go from there. But should something happen to that card, then all of your images will be lost. However, with the dual card systems in cameras, you can either shoot RAW and JPEG or RAW to both or something like that. So you have the 2 cards and they both got the same images on, so if one card corrupts, then you still got the other card to use. So that's why it's always handy to have multiple cards, so you can write to 2 cards at the same time and have the spare cards for when those get full and put the next images on. Like I said at the beginning, there's multiple different accessories which you can get for cameras and photography and things like that. So all of it isn't covered here, but that's some of the basics that I use and what I think you would benefit from having. If you think there's something that I've missed, please let me know, and in the next video when I record something like this, I'll make sure to include it. Hopefully your bank balance isn't going to get hurt too much with all of this, but like the same as me, I'm always going on and seeing new things and think, I need that, I need that, I need that. Spending more and more money. For some people it's a very expensive hobby, but if that's what you enjoy doing, then that's what you enjoy doing. So let's continue on with the course. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about depth of field. Depth of field is a photography term which is used to describe the focus between the nearest and the farthest object in an image. Depth of field is calculated based on a couple of things. One, the focal length, which is how far you are away from the subject, the aperture you're using, whether you're using a low aperture or a high aperture, and also the distance to subject. When you're using an aperture like f1.8 or f2.8, you've got a very narrow depth of field. So if you're taking a photograph of someone and your focus is right here on the eye, the things behind and in front will be out of focus. So that's really good for portraits. However, it's very hard to get the subject bang on focus if you've got such a narrow depth of field. For example, if you're doing macro photography and you're taking a picture of a product, you're only going to have a small amount of the product in focus while the rest of it is going to be out of focus. On the other hand, if you're using f11 or f20 or something like that, more of the images are going to be in focus. So when you're taking a portrait, you're going to have your person and your background in focus. And when you're taking product shots, for example, you're going to have more of the product in focus, either the foreground and the background or the actual product itself. So depending on what sort of image you want to capture and how much detail you want to capture in the subject and or the background, it depends on what sort of depth of field you're going to use. So if you want to make a subject pop out of a background, then you're going to use a narrow depth of field, so f2.8, f1.8, even something like f3.5 or 5.6. It all depends on what focal length you're using and how far away they are from the background too. So for example, on this video, I'm shooting at f2.8. As you can see, the background's quite in focus as well, and I'm in focus. However, if I take a step closer, I'm going to be in focus, and see there, the background's jumped out of focus because I'm closer to the lens, so therefore it's going to focus on me. So shooting at low aperture like f2.8 doesn't always mean that you're going to get a blurry background. It's the other factors to take into consideration as well. So the distance from the camera and also the focal length. And the video as well, I'm shooting on a 16mm lens, so it's quite a wide lens. So when you're shooting at f2.8, there's going to be more of it in focus anyway. Whereas if I was shooting on a 70-200 or something like that, then when I'm zoomed in, even at 70mm, the background's just going to chuck it out of focus at f2.8. So that's the explanation of depth of field and how you can use that in photographs photographs to portray the image that you want to portray. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about aperture. So what is aperture? Aperture is one of the three stable things in the exposure triangle which is used when taking photographs. The other two are ISO and shutter speed, which we'll cover at a later date. Aperture is usually defined as the opening in the lens which allows light to enter into the camera. An easy way to think about aperture is thinking about your eyes and your irises. When you're going in between dark rooms and light rooms, the iris in your eyes expands and it also decreases in size, so it will go really small or go really large, and that's the way you think about aperture and how it lets in more light or less light. Normally in lenses you get a thing called aperture rings, and that's how you control the aperture. The way they work is they go smaller and bigger to let in more light depending on what aperture you choose. So high numbers of aperture like f22, you have a really big circle so it lets in more light. However, on the other spectrum, when you use an f1.8 or f2.8, you get a really small circle. So when you use an aperture, that also controls your depth of field. As we discussed in the previous video, when you're shooting at different apertures like f1.8 or on the other side of the spectrum f22, the aperture rings in the lens is either going to be massive like that to let in loads of light, or it's going to be much smaller and you're going to have a smaller hole to let light through. So when you're in low light situations, to let in more light, you need to drop your aperture down to f2.8, f1.8, or whatever the smallest you can get. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you're out in the sunlight and you want to capture that without the image being too bright, what you need to do is go to f22 or something like that. That will increase the depth of field, so there's going to be more of the image in focus. However, that's going to stop letting loads of light in and get your image overexposed. That's an overview of aperture, which, like I said, was one of the three stable basics of the exposure triangle. And in the next topics we'll be going over the shutter speed and the ISO as well, so you can see how to use them three together to get the perfect exposed image. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about shutter speed. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is one of the three basics of the exposure triangle along with ISO and aperture. So you mainly use the shutter speed for two different things. One is making the image brighter or darker by increasing or decreasing the shutter speed. The other one is whether you want to capture freeze motion or you want to have more motion in the image. So if you're using a fast shutter speed, that'll freeze a moment. For example, if someone's running and you want to capture that movement when they're in the mid-air, what you need to use is a fast shutter speed, so that'll capture that moment and freeze it in time. On the other side, if you want to take a picture of a river or the sea or something like that, and you want to capture all the movement so it looks like silky glass smooth image, then what you need to do is have a longer shutter speed so you can capture all of that movement. What happens in a camera, you have a shutter, and the shutter speed controls that shutter of how long it's open and how long it's closed. And depending on how long it's open or closed, that's how much light it's going to let in. So when the shutter's open, it exposes the sensor to the data and the light and stuff like that, and that's how you capture the image using the shutter speed. So like we said, the shutter speed controls how long the shutter's open and what sort of image you're going to get. So if you want to get some motion blur images, then you need to use a long shutter speed, and if you want to capture something like a water droplet, you need a fast shutter speed. Adjusting the shutter speed, you can get a number of different things. So there's one technique called panning. So what you need to do is you follow with your camera like this and you take a picture, and what happens is it captures the background as a blur because you're moving past it, but your subject that you're following stays in focus. I used to do this quite a lot when I was shooting car photographs. So you'd have a car drive past and you follow it with the camera and you take some pictures, and that car will be freezed in the frame whereas the background's going to be out of focus. And generally, as a rule of thumb, the way I used to do it is whatever speed the car is going, that's what shutter speed you need. So if the car's going to go past 30 miles an hour, you need 1/30th of a second, and that enables the car to be captured and the background to be blurry. When you're using panning, you can do that handheld. However, if you need to do things like capturing the water on a river and you want to make that really slow, what you need to do is put the camera on a tripod so there's no camera movement, no camera shake, so your image will be absolutely spot on with the focus and things like that. Then on the complete other side of the spectrum, you can go really creative with it, and there's a lot of things that you can do. So I've shot some stuff in the studio with portraits, so I've had a long exposure, so I've captured all of the movement of the person moving around and had a flash so it freezes that motion. So I use that quite a lot in my mental health project. So as you can see, there's like the person's moving along and it looks like a sort of spirit's following them because that's capturing all that movement. So you can get really creative with shutter speed, so it's a really good thing to have and to know about. So that's the basics of shutter speed, and what I'll do in another future course, some of the things I mentioned like the panning, I'll go over that and I'll do a full tutorial on it of how you can create some great images using that. And the same with in the studio with the portraits, I'll do a tutorial on that so we can see how you can capture movement of a person and then freeze that motion as well. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about ISO. So what is ISO? And to explain this, we're going to talk about exposure triangle again. So an exposure triangle is used in photography to take a picture, and there's three main aspects of that. That's aperture, shutter speed and ISO. Essentially, ISO, when you adjust the setting to lower or higher, is how much light enters the sensor and how bright or dark the image is. This is a really handy tool to use, especially if you're shooting in dark environments. If you need to make the picture brighter, all you have to do is bump up the ISO. However, when you do that, there's a thing called noise which gets introduced. Ideally, you need to use a lower ISO, so what you'd have to do to to get a brighter image is lower your aperture, so you can go down to f1.8, f2.8, whatever you need to, and you can possibly get around with moving your shutter speed around as well, so you can keep that ISO low, but if you need to, then you can always bump it up. When you're using your ISO and you go through the ISO steps, so from ISO 100 to 200, that doubles the exposure allowed into the sensor on your image, and this goes up all through the range, so 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600, 1600 to 3200, and so on like that. These days you can get away with using high ISO, especially on the modern day cameras and the editing software, because the cameras got a lot better now for handling the high ISO, and of course in the editing software you can use the noise reduction and other things like that, so you can improve your images and get really usable images even using high ISO like 12,800 and things like that, which is really handy, especially if you're doing weddings and events and you capture moments on the evening but you don't want to set up flash or worry about technical specifications and things like that. So you can just put in your aperture, your shutter speed, your ISO, just shoot away, capture everything and not have to worry about anything else. I'm sure in the near future we'll do some other tutorials and other videos based on ISO, so keep an eye out for them. What's up everybody, it's time to go Bokelicious. So what do you mean about Bokelicious? Well, what I'm talking about is bokeh or bokeh. So in photography terms, the bokeh or bokeh refers to the out of focus bits behind on the image. So you hear it quite commonly with the bokeh balls. So when you're using an aperture like f1.8, f2.8 and you're getting the background out of focus, you're going to get those focus things, usually with the light they're going to turn into balls. So then bokeh is essentially a Japanese translation of blur. The good thing about bokeh is that it makes your photographs visually appealing. So for example, when you're taking a picture and you have loads of bokeh or bokeh balls in the background, that's going to bring the focus into the subject of the thing which is actually in focus. So it makes the user draw the eye straight to it. Bokeh is the actual quality of the blur which is behind the subject and not the actual blur itself. So remember, as we talked about in the previous video, the actual blur itself is relating to the depth of field and regarding the aperture, and the bokeh is the quality. The bokeh is actually rendered from the lens, not the camera. So if you want some really good bokeh balls and the quality of them is absolutely amazing, the best thing to do is get some really old lenses, use an adapter like for example the M42 lenses. You can get some of them and they're absolutely amazing at putting the background out of focus with the depth of field and the aperture, and then the quality of that background blur is just fantastic. So if you want some really good bokeh, then recommend some old lenses. So you can get different kinds of bokeh. So you can get the round bokeh balls, and you can also get hexagons and other things like that. That is based on the aperture blades. So for example, some of the lenses have 7 straight aperture blades, and that creates a hexagon shape, whereas most of the modern day lenses and things like that have the round apertures. So that's how you get the round bokeh balls. And that's bokeh covered. And that was Bokelicious. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about color temperature. Color temperature is something that you can change in the settings on your camera, and that affects how the image looks. Color temperature is measured in kelvins, or K for short. The higher the number, the colder and or whiter the image will get, and the lower number, the more warmer it will get. And the Kelvin or color temperature is used in images to actually make the image look as though it should do in whatever lighting you're using. So for example, if you're using candles, you need to be at something like 1800 Kelvin, and that replicates the color of the candles and all the environment. When you're using flash, I generally use 5600 or sometimes 5500, and that's the electronic flash Kelvin for general manufacturers. Sometimes lights are different, so you have to refer to whatever light you've got, but the majority of the Godox stuff that I've got is either 5500 or 5600, and it's absolutely spot on for that. In most cameras you can adjust this manually, so you can set a Kelvin number, so you can go from there, or there's also sections in there so you can have cloudy, sunlight, and all of those different things, and that automatically changes and picks the Kelvin number for you, so you don't have to remember which one it is. So if you're shooting outside and it's cloudy or overcast, you can choose a cloudy one, and that'll adjust your color temperature so your images look more lifelike than what it would be on auto white balance or a different Kelvin setting. You can set it in the camera, and you can also use editing software to adjust it once you've shot it if you're shooting in RAW. However, I prefer to do it in camera so it's already done before I even import it. What you can also do is mess around with color balance when you're shooting pictures if you want something a bit different. So for example, if you wanted a purple type image, rather than editing it, you can shoot it with that Kelvin in the camera, and you can get that straight out the camera with that purple sort of tinge, or you can go a cooler or a darker. Another example, so if you're shooting outside and you want to emulate that sunrise or sunset, then you can whack up the Kelvin down so the image is a lot warmer, and it'll emulate the warm sun and the yellow sun rather than the bright white daylight. So that's color temperature covered, and like I said in one of the other ones with the portraits where you can adjust the color temperature, I'll probably be doing another tutorial or another video based on that as well, so you can see how to mess around with color balance and get some really unique and different images. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about long exposure. So what is long exposure? We've talked about it previously on the video regarding shutter speed when we're saying to slow the shutter down and you let in loads of light and loads of motion on your image, and that's essentially a long exposure photo. As we stated before, generally if you're doing this you need to put the camera on a tripod like we have now, so there's no shaking and no movement of the camera, so your image will not be blurry or things like that. We've already discussed about using long exposure to capture water and make that silky smooth, but there's also another different thing. So if you're shooting at night time, you can, instead of using flash, you can let in more light. So if you're shooting the stars or shooting a landscape or something like that, you can set the exposure time on your shutter speed to say 30 seconds, not letting 30 seconds of light. So if it's really dark, it should let in enough light for that image to be correctly exposed. Another one for using long exposure is you can actually light paint with it. So if you set your camera up for 30 seconds or even a minute or 2 minutes or something like that, depending on how dark the environment is, what you can do is if you shine a light into the lens, that's going to capture all of that light on the sensor, so you can actually draw your name or you can actually paint something. So if you've got taking a photograph of a car and the car's in darkness, what you can do is you can get a light, you can go all the way around the car, and wherever the light hits on the car, that will light it up and that'll capture that on the sensor, so when you see the final image, that car's going to be lit up. So we used to do it back in the day, so you set the camera up like this, you get a torch shining in the lens so you can write your name or you can draw different things like that, and then you get your image from that. Or you can take it one step further and you can get different patterns and loads of things like that. I've also seen some light painting done with the bike tire, put some lights on it, and when you spin it, it actually captures all that movement and it creates light spheres, and they just look absolutely amazing. When you're using long exposure, you can get really creative and get some really fantastic images. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about focal length. So what is focal length? A lot of people get this confused and think that the focal length is the actual size of the lens. That is partly true, because if you've got a 50mm lens, that's your 50mm focal length, but it's not the actual size of the lens, which is the physical size, it's the optical size of that lens. Focal length is actually the distance from the sensor to the optics of the lens, and that's how you get the 50mm or 35mm or 70-200mm. That's the focal length, so when you adjust that, that's how far away the optics go from the sensor. Why is focal length important? Because it's going to determine what sort of image you're going to get by using what lens. Said in one of the previous videos, I'm using a 16mm lens, and as you can see, it's a really wide angle lens, so you get quite a lot in shot here. Whereas if I was using something like a 50mm, then that would be much closer in, and the same with 70-200, you get that zoomed in. Depending on what lens you use is depending on what focal length you get. So for example, a wide angle lens like a Sigma 10-20mm, you can switch between the 10 and 20mm when you're zooming in and out, and the 10mm has a really wide view, so you get a lot in the frame. The same with things like a fisheye. So I've got a 7.5mm fisheye, and that's a really wide view, so you get loads in. Then on the other end of the spectrum, if you go like a 70-200 or 300mm, 400mm, that's a really zoomed in lens, so anything far away you can see that really close up. So people who are doing wildlife photography, things like that, you can get like 500mm, 1000mm. That allows you to stay away from the animals and still capture those really up close and large on your camera. The other thing to consider when using focal length is the actual camera itself, whether you're using a full frame or a cropped or mirrorless or something like that. So if you're using a full frame, whatever lens you put on is the actual focal length that you're going to get. So as I'm using a Fuji and it's a mirrorless, it's got a crop sensor, so if I was to put on something like a 35mm lens, that would actually be a 52mm lens, or roughly about that, because it's cropped. So just bearing that in mind, so if you needed a really wide angle lens, you'd have to get something even smaller to equate to something that you would use on a full frame camera. On the other hand, when you're using a full frame and you've got a 70-200 on, you're only going to get up to that 70-200 focal length, whereas if you're using this on the cropped Fuji, then your 200mm is actually going to be much more, so you're going to be zoomed in even further. And that's a quick rundown on focal length. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about digital and optical zoom. So those with DSLRs who have the interchangeable lenses, this is not really going to be anything to do with you, but it's more so for the bridge cameras, and also if you're doing photography on your mobile phone and things like that. So firstly we're going to talk about optical zoom. Optical zoom is how far you can zoom in or out with your actual lens or camera without affecting the image quality. So if you've got an 18-55mm lens, you can zoom in between 18 and 55 each of those focal lengths will have the same quality because that's your optical zoom, and that's using the optics in the lens itself. Then on the other hand, when you're using digital zoom in bridge cameras and mobile phones like that, what it does, it digitally enhances and zooms in on the image to get you closer to what your subject needs to be. However, when it does that, that degrades image quality. You'll probably be able to see on some of your images it gets really pixelated and very blurry and things like that. The best thing I'd recommend is, if you've got a camera that does digital and optical zoom, is zoom in as far as you can on optical zoom, and if you need to go in zoomed further, take it on the furthest optical zoom that you can, take it in your editing software and then zoom in using that image, because the quality is going to be so much better than using the inbuilt camera or phone digital zoom, so you're going to end up with a better image. Like I said, those with DSLRs and interchangeable lenses and stuff like that, you're not going to have to worry about this because all of the zooming is optical zoom because you zoom using the lens itself. But with cameras with the lenses built in, then that's the issue that comes up with digital and optical zoom. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about noise. Not that kind of noise, noise within photographs. Noise is usually described as visual distortion in an image. So for example, if you're shooting in low light, then you're going to get more noise in your image and it's going to distort the image. Obviously you get noise in your film photography based on the film that you use and things like that, but in digital photography it's slightly different. Sometimes the decoration behind or the blur or the bokeh isn't that nice when you're using high ISO and the noise just comes into a messy blur. Again, as we spoke about, if you're there capturing moments, so a late night sporting event or something like that, it's okay to have some noise and some grain in it because that sometimes adds to the effect. However, if you're doing something like architecture photography or property photography, things like that, you don't want any noise in because that'll distort the image and give off weird colors and things like that. So you need to use a low ISO to minimize noise. So again, the main culprit of getting noise in your images is ISO and high ISO. The way to think about it is like a guitar amp. So if you've got your volume and amplification on the amp, the more you turn it up, the more noise you're going to get. So therefore, when you're taking pictures, the more noise you're going to get in a picture as well. The more you crank it up, that's it. So what happens if you're shooting mainly in nighttime and you need to get those high ISO to get the good images? What you can recommend is a full frame sensor. So something like Canon 5D Mark III, Mark IV, other full frame cameras, they handle and perform better in low light because they have a bigger sensor. And also you can get a higher megapixel camera and that has more megapixels, so the grain's not going to be as bad because there's more pixels to work with. Whereas if you're shooting on something like a 10 megapixel camera, when you're taking images, the grain is going to be over large size of the image because there's not going to be as many pixels per image to hide that grain. So again, like we spoke about in the previous video, the way you can get around it is shooting low ISO, or you can actually, if you are shooting in high ISO, you can use the camera's inbuilt image noise reduction to help reduce that. Or if you're shooting in RAW, you can import it in your editing software. That helps it loads better. And you can also use noise reduction in the software or the specific applications and programs which are developed just to handle the noise reduction in images. What's up everybody? Today we're going to talk about composition. So what is composition? Composition is how you compose the leading subject or the thing which you want your viewer's eyes to go to in the photograph. So for example, the composition that I chose for this video tutorial series video thing is I'm bang on in the middle of the screen. So if I need to, I can put things either side of us and things like that. And obviously when people are looking at the screen, I'm dead in the center. However, when I'm shooting photographs and video and other things like that where I need different subjects, what I like to use is the rule of thirds, which a lot of you may or may not know. A quick rundown on the rule of thirds is what you need to do is divide your actual image up into 3 different things, horizontal and vertical, and you should end up with 9 squares. What you want to do is take 4 of those squares and fill that with your subject. So for example, on the rule of thirds, what I could do is move over to this way and use these 4 boxes at the top of imaginary rule of thirds and actually focus myself on that and use that as the drawing subject. So if I was to take a step over here, and now I'm in these top 4 boxes, so therefore that's a rule of thirds, and that's technically to make the composition of the image look a bit more pleasing. But again, like with any single rule in photography, these can be broken and they don't have to be adhered to all of the time or even any of the time. So you don't have to take every photo with someone in the corner or using things like that or someone bang in the center. You can adjust it, you can mess around with it, see what's good, see what's bad. All you have to do is just take images and see which you like and go from there. The same with composition, like for example, if you're taking a portrait of someone and you need the portrait and the background in focus, what you can do is have the portrait of the person over one side and have the background over the other side. And that's the composition used, so you can see both things in the image and go from there. And using that sort of composition, you can see both things in the photograph, and if one's out of focus and one's in focus, then it'll lead the person's eye to whatever's in focus, and that's the composition for that image. What's up everybody? It's the end of the course. That's the end of the course for Learn the Absolute Basics of Photography. Hope you worked through the course and you learned some stuff and you enjoyed the videos talking about the technical specifications of things that you need to know for absolute basics of photography really. If you're watching this on the website, then thank you very much for subscribing to the course, and hopefully I'll be doing a lot more courses in the near future, so regarding lighting and other basics of photography along with advanced photography stuff as well. And we'll be delving into some video as well, so anyone who wants to learn some video, that'll be some of the course that's coming in the future. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please head over to the description and learnphoto.co.uk. That's our website, which is the online learning course, so you can go on there and learn loads about photography, and there's loads of free downloads and other things like that as well. The next step after this course is a little questionnaire, so there's some questions to see whether you've been learning things and other things like that. There's also a section so you can leave some comments to see how you found the course and see if it was okay to navigate through, if the course was actually knowledgeable for yourself, and if you learned some things as well. So it'd be great to see those comments and to read them back and things like that. If you found this course and videos useful, please send it to friends and get them involved as well. It'd be great to have loads of people on the website so we can teach people photography and get to people to the place where they want to be with their photography and their business. Like I said, some of the other tutorials which will be coming is regarding the lighting, advanced things. We'll also be covering things regarding business and portfolios, social media, everything like that. Everything that you need with photography to get your name out there, get your images out there, and get your content seen. If there's anything else you want covered on YouTube, or courses, or training videos, or tutorials, or behind the scenes, or anything like that, please let me know and we'll get that on the website as well and on YouTube. Yeah, hope you had fun learning the absolute basics of photography, and it was so great to have you here and watching all the content. Until next time, see ya.